Well, we're 2 minutes past now, so I think we should be able to kick off. So first of all, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, or good morning from a very wet and rainy Singapore, in Chinatown anyway. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. All right, this is an opportunity for us to present to you on our webinar on what we're calling From Legacy to Leader. I'm joined by a great panelist. I'll introduce the guys very, very shortly. But the idea of today is to focus on a real life customer, okay? The most popular furniture store in Singapore, and effectively how they went from legacy to leader from a technology perspective. I've been on these webinars, I've ran these webinars before, and previously they're a lot more kind of theoretical, a lot of methodology based. And whilst we're going to utilize methodology as part of this discussion, we're going to kind of speak to a real life customer, understand their real pain points, challenges, the pitfalls, and obviously the benefits they went through when migrating and modernizing onto cloud. So we've got 30 to 45 minutes of kind of Q&A throughout this. We'll leave some answers, some Q&A towards the end of the session as well. But just some housekeeping to start with. On the right-hand side of your GoToWebinar, there should be some questions. As and when you want to ask a question, please just put it in there. And at the end of the session, if we have time, we'll try our best to go through. All right. But intros to start with. So I'm Callum. So I'm the MD for Just After Midnight. Okay. So I'm based in Singapore. I'm a technologist at heart myself. I was at IBM for 8 to 9 years in solution architecture, solution consultancy roles. In the past 4 to 5 years, been more focused on the hyperscalers. You also may be thinking of who is Just After Midnight. It very much sounds like a restaurant, like a nightclub or a late night bar, but in reality, we're a managed service organization. All right, so we provide infrastructure and application support to our customers that are focused on cloud. The past 3 to 4 years, though, we've been much more focused on professional services. So everything from migrations to modernizations and really supporting customers with their most complex challenges. And we were the partner that obviously did, in collaboration with 42 and with AWS, pursued and completed this project of migrating and modernizing them. Enough about me. Let me pass across to Jasper, who will let him introduce himself.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jasper. I'm the CTO of 42. So background is I joined 42 in 2011, but unfortunately, I'm not one of the founding members. We actually founded in 2007. And so when I first joined, we were running quite a small team. So that's kind of like the environment that I joined into. And probably if you're shopping around for furniture or you're in the market for furniture, you've most likely heard of 42. You're most likely considered one of furniture before. So yeah, that's 42. Yeah.
Thanks, Jasper. And yeah, 20% of my house is 42 based, thanks to my wife. Katie, over to you now, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Katie, and I'm a Principal Account Manager here at AWS Singapore. So I've been in AWS for a little bit over 7 years now. And yeah, I help customers on their AWS adoption journey. So yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. Well, let's jump into it straight away. So obviously the webinar is about migration, modernization, and Jasper, maybe the first question is to you. Obviously, for us to get an understanding of how we have migrated and modernized you on cloud, I think it's important for us to kind of understand your current state architecture before that, right? So what were the challenges you were facing? Really, why did you want to move to cloud?
Yeah, sure. So before we moved on to AWS, we were actually renting out a dedicated server from a local provider called Rodian. So that worked out, but we rented the server for about 6 to 7 years. At the start, it's okay, but as the years go by, the hardware doesn't get refreshed, and we are always struggling to update the legacy software. And when you hear things like that, obviously things like security comes into mind, because then it becomes very hard to manage from the security aspect, just trying to keep up everything from scratch. And on my own, on our own, based on my very lean team here in 42. So yeah, there wasn't it's quite tedious to just maintain it and keep on top of all the security features that we need to update. And we also had a development server that's hosted on DigitalOcean. So from there, what we'll normally do is that we will develop the features that we want, and we'll test it on the development server. After that, it's straight to production. So it's risky, and it's not the ideal setup that we have. So we decided that we needed a change. Yeah.
Awesome. And I think it's so important, exactly what you've touched on there, before even starting any project, right, whether it's migration, modernization, or just general standard project, that we have some key requirements, principles from the business and why you want to do it. So often I see customers, and Katie's nodding here as well, people kind of move to cloud because potentially it's the buzzword, they've drank the Kool-Aid, they've read the news, but you have to have real business reason and why you want to do that, right? So the ones you touched on there, standard but very key reasons: performance, right, comparing to effectively a legacy on-prem site before. AWS is the most performant kind of cloud out there. Resiliency, by having all of those various availability zones kind of spread around. Availability and uptime, and obviously security as well. And that allows us then to obviously design the architecture based on these overarching principles, right? So really, really important. So thanks for sharing that. Katie, I'll come to you next. So following on that response from Jasper, kind of what are you seeing in the industry, right? Why are customers now looking to migrate and modernize onto cloud?
Sure. So let me start by saying this first, right? So cloud service providers like AWS, we've been around for a good 18 years now. So yeah, I think having workloads on the cloud or migrating to the cloud is no longer something foreign, if you ask me. I mean, if you ask me, it's the new normal, right? However, as a trend, what we are seeing now is that instead of just rehosting on the cloud, we are seeing customers tap on more advanced services, right? So like, for example, serverless technology. So ECS on Fargate, Lambda on AWS, just to name a few, really takes away the heavy lifting of what Jasper described just now, right? So instead of provisioning servers, capacity planning, patching, right? By tapping on these services, basically, customers get to, get back their time, right, and resources to focus on things that really matter to their business, right? So yeah, instead of just rehosting, we are seeing customers, looking into modernization, making their application much more scalable, robust, just like what you've touched on. And of course, as a trend, besides that, with that boom of Gen AI, we're seeing a lot of customers tapping into analytics, machine learning, and yeah, Gen AI services on AWS as well. So that's what we're seeing, yeah, across the industry actually.
A great answer, thanks for that. I think one of the key ones there was operations. Jasper, you said you had a lead team. When you look to modernize, when you look to go serverless, obviously it drives that benefit of no scalability. You don't have to kind of vertically scale your instance, right? It's automatic. In addition to the cost, in addition to the patching, so the benefits obviously outweigh the pros. Obviously there's a cost to get there, right? And how we modernize, and we've got a couple of slides on that later. But what we find, what I'm seeing in the industry, the cost 100% outweighs the negatives. So okay, coming on to me now, I'm just going to share a methodology slide, right? I said I wasn't going to speak too much around methodology, but I think it's important to start with this. And so often I see customers, I speak with them, and Katie would have seen this previously as well. People rush to migrate to cloud, right? Because again, they've drank the Kool-Aid, they've heard the buzzwords. And kind of what I'm showing here is a tried and tested methodology that we at Jam use for our customers, that we utilize with 42. And the idea is just to take your time, right? Utilize a tried and tested methodology to avoid downtime, avoid reputational impact, revenue impact, and effectively don't rush these things. But let's walk through it, right? So on the left-hand side, we've got discovery. So from my perspective and from any kind of migration SA's perspective, discovery is the most important part of any migration. And the reason why, we need to really understand exactly what we have in source, right? Understand exactly what we have in Vodium's for Jasper's perspective, understand whether it's on-prem or whether it's in a server room in your office, right? Understanding everything from server storage, backup network, all of those good things, okay? And then to the software, to the applications, the application dependencies. So what application talks to what application? Because if you have application A and B and they have a really kind of low latency requirement, you can't then move application B away first. Okay, so you need to really understand exactly what you have first before you can even start to think about your migration. In addition to that, it's the principles. So going back to the principles that we spoke about, so from Jasper's benefit, it was performance, resiliency, availability, and security. They were the key reasons as to why he, as a CTO and the business, wanted to consider to move to cloud. Now, once we've got that, we can then go into the second pillar, right, which is the design. This allows us to design the end state architecture in AWS, right, based on those principles. Then into the schedule. So for the project managers on the call that would enjoy that, everything from the prereqs to the cloud build, to the migration of non-prod, to production, to the testing, to the cutover. So a long but healthy kind of project management schedule that has buy-in from all the stakeholders, from the customer, from the partner, from the application vendor, includes the change freezers. This is something that you cannot miss, right? Everyone has to be bought into that schedule. Now, underneath that, we've got what's called building foundations, right? So again, I see this regularly now. Customers migrated to cloud a couple of years ago. They rushed. Everything's in one big account, one VPC, a couple of subnets, and now they're struggling to scale, right? So they haven't separated the environment by workload accounts, by login accounts, by network accounts, and now they're looking to unpick that, and it's taken a lot of time, right? So what we mean by this is creating your accounts utilizing landing zones or control towers to allow you to scale from a workload perspective, but also as security and compliance becoming so critical now, this is why it's a big focus point. And then we go on to the move. So the fourth or fifth pillar, this is effectively your rehost, replatform, refactor, 6 to 7 hours these days, in addition to your technical testing and business testing. Then going into the cutover, the support, and then finally finishing off with the final one, which is manage, optimize, and obviously modernize, which is part of this conversation as well. This is very much the journey that we follow for 42 and that we try to embed during all of our customer conversations when we do a migration. I guess my main point here is just take your time, follow a methodology. There's multiple ones out there, but don't just do this on a whim, okay? All right, so what did it look like for 42? Let's jump on to the next slide, okay? So this is the version 1 architecture. So we haven't modernized yet, right? So we'll go on to the reason as to why we haven't modernized straight away, but effectively let's jump into it, right? So this is a simple AWS architecture diagram. The region is in Singapore. You can see we have 2 availability zones. We've got public and private subnets, but let's jump into it, right? So point number 1, application move to AWS EC2 on next-gen infra to improve speed and performance. So again, we're hitting the principles, right? Again, which is performance. Previously on-prem or in Vodium, the performance wasn't great, user experience issues. So we've moved that onto AWS to utilize the latest and greatest hardware, okay? Now, one thing I just want to bring out here is all we have done is rehosted this application onto AWS. We haven't changed the operating system. We haven't upgraded or altered any of the application code. We've just simply lifted and shifted this onto AWS, right, in terms of speed and to get that performance benefit straight away. So at the minute, it still classes what we call a monolithic application, right? We haven't kind of dripped it down into microservices yet. It's still that heavy application, which is running Magento, which is the core part of the 42 business, okay? Point number 3, so this architecture is hosted in 1 availability zone with the ability to back up and restore to S3 in the event of a DR invocation. So for the people on the call that are more kind of on-prem, they're not too cloud focused at the minute, your availability zone is as close to data centers as possible, right? So you'll see on this architecture diagram on the left-hand side, everything's in 1 AZ, in 1 data center, right? So at the minute, this is very much a active passive or hot or cold DR terminology. In the event of a DR, we would have to recover from backup, right? So we'd have to utilize S3 as the object storage and then utilize kind of a backup and restore methodology, which would typically be about 24 hours for us to do that, right? So at the minute, it's not fault tolerant, it's not highly available because the application doesn't or didn't allow that at that time. All right. Point number 4, the database is hosted on Aurora with enhanced disk resiliency with 6 copies and better performance throughput. So now we're really getting the benefit of AWS straight away. So we re-platform that old legacy database running SQL now to the most performant SQL database in AWS. Okay. In addition to that, it's got enhanced disk resiliency. So all of the storage, which is SSD, is spread across all the AZs from a redundancy perspective. Again, hitting one of Jasper's key principles. And then finally, point number 5, utilizing Cloudflare WAF and DDoS. So previously, Jasper had Cloudflare WAF and DDoS, so that was a very quick and change just to utilize that for AWS as well. But from a security perspective, we've separated everything by public and private subnets. We have the NACLs within there, and naturally very fine-grained IAM controls as well. But nothing revolutionary here, right? Again, this is simply just a rehost, a lift and shift to cloud, to give Jasper and his team the immediate benefit whilst we're thinking about modernization. We'll come on to that a little bit later. Okay, cool. So let's come back now. I guess Jasper, coming back to you. So now we've seen that architecture version 1, right? You're in AWS. What's the next step of the process? Was you happy with that architecture, or did you want to modernize? And in reality, why?
Yeah, so like you rightly mentioned, when we came on board AWS, it's really a lift and shift. We didn't change much because what we have in the application is not ready for too dramatic of a change. So what we have now is that through this lift and shift, although we are re-platformed to better resiliency, but yet our application can't really scale. So we could, spin up as many EC2 instances just to make it scale. But then the issue is that our application wasn't ready. And what we really need to do is to really identify what are the points that becomes a single point of failure. And having what we have now, which is that pretty much all our software is run within one single EC2 instance, minus things like Redis and other software. It really becomes a huge, huge application hosted on one server. It's really too much to lose at one go, and the complexity is to manage it is really challenging. So I think the real drive for us is, like you mentioned, we really need to build something more resilient. We really need something that is scalable and fault tolerant, and we really just needed a better process moving forward when we release new versions of our software, like I mentioned before, which is right now. Before that, we are just from development straight to production. So we really need to change that. Yeah.
No, awesome. Thanks so much for that. Yeah, I was just noticing some of these principles down again. So very similar to the first one, right? But obviously slightly different. Obviously, we've got DevOps releases in there to allow you to release a bit quicker. Availability, again, resiliency, scalability. So key overarching principles, which is obviously critical on how we design, again, an end state architecture for AWS. So thank you for sharing that. Let's come back to me now. So we'll speak it around again, a bit about methodology again, and then finish off with what it looked like for 42 in version 2. Here we go. Okay, so this is what we call the crawl, walk, run methodology, right? And effectively what it is, on the left-hand side, we have the crawl, on the right-hand side, we have the run. And the reason as to why when I speak with customers about the crawl, walk, run is, and Katie would be exactly the same, a lot of customers rush, again, like we said, right? Migrate, modernize, they see the benefits on cloud and how they utilize cloud native features, and they want to get there like that, okay? But like I said, avoiding the business disruption, revenue impact, downtime, reputational impact is so important. So we utilize this crawl, walk, run. So what did it look like for 42? So on the left-hand side, we have the crawl. So for 42's benefit, this is the build on AWS, and this is the migrate, right? So we're focusing on building a strong foundational capability by taking advantage of market-leading technologies while removing legacy systems from the environment. So we've rehosted onto the more performant architecture. We've left that legacy behind, right? That legacy debt that was in Vodium and DigitalOcean, and now we're housing just one cloud provider. Now, the difference between crawl and walk from Jasper's perspective, before we even started the modernization discussion, actually, I think at Jasper it was around about 6 months, right? Jasper and his team just wanted the stability on cloud, right? They wanted to understand what cloud was. Operationally, they had to manage it. We had to manage it slightly different. So they didn't want to rush into modernizing and starting that journey straight away. So that was 6 months before we even started the journey. Other customers, it can be kind of weeks to months, but my key thing here is, again, just don't rush and get straight into the modernization journey immediately, right? But what does it mean, modernization? So this is the walk phase. So this is where we're focusing on refining internal processes and technologies by aligning to a mature delivery model, including an application transformation and introducing DevOps processes, right? And this journey itself for 42 and Jam, when we was working together on it, it was around about 18 months, right? It's not something that you can complete in a matter of weeks. It has to have buy-in from an application perspective, the entire business, infrastructure. These are things that take time, but the key thing here is don't rush it, right? You don't want to be pushing releases and they're having issues from an infra, from an application perspective, and you're getting user issues. You're losing your reputation, right? Take your time with it, because the business and the team will thank you for it. And then once it's modernized, we get into that run, right? That deliver phase. This is where now for 42, we're reaping the benefits of a transformed environment with cloud native technology, delivering real-time business needs through automation and AI. Okay, so it's very much, again, a methodology, a journey. The key thing here is just take your time, don't rush it. So what did it look like for 42? So let's jump to the next slide. And this focuses on the version 2 architecture for 42. So again, similar kind of setup in terms of the region in AWS, 2 availability zones, a lot more busy now in terms of the architecture, and I'll walk through that. But point number 1, I hope it's visible. The top yellow box is what I'm walking through at the start. This is headless architecture with Vue Storefront to decouple front and back end to utilize modern capabilities to introduce and offer a better user experience and faster load time. So if you remember in version 1, we had that big, heavy monolithic application, right? The front and back, it was all in together, all the functions were together. In the event that the business had to scale up, like Jasper said, they had to vertically scale. Now with vertically scaling, obviously we're going to have downtime there, a period of that, right? And what we typically see is in the market, in the industry, customers, when they have that big, heavy monolithic application, they're just going to preempt and going to put the biggest infrastructure on there all the time, because they don't want the issue of scaling. They don't want disruption in terms of customers coming in, there's too much CPU. So first of all, by decoupling the front and the back end, right, that creates that separation. So then the front and the back end speak to each other via an API, and this is what we call a headless CMS, okay? Point number 2, Magento and the Vue application will be deployed to an auto-scaling group of ECS Fargate tasks to automatically scale to serve spikes in buyer visits. This cluster is resilience to an AZ outage. So again, we've gone from that heavy monolithic application, and now we're in microservices, right? So no longer scaling vertically, we're now scaling horizontally. As and when the traffic comes in, we're just going to scale, right? And the beauty with it, and Katie spoke about it, this is serverless, right? So as and when it comes in, it goes up, but the beauty of it, when it's not there, it goes back down as well. So effectively, you're only paying for what you use, which is the beauty of serverless. In addition to, there's no patching, the operation, the ease of that is much easier compared to managing that big, heavy EC2. Point number 3, Aurora and Redis design highly available to ensure resiliency and uptime. So yeah, across all this architecture, from the database, the cache, the application layer is actually fault tolerant now. So we no longer have to restore from S3. It's automatically going to handle an AZ outage. And then the same with the database and the caching layer as well. Point number 4, utilizing OpenSearch to improve the search performance and stopping the load on the database. And finally, point number 5, introducing a full CI/CD pipeline for 42. So as and when they deploy things, previously it was all manually. As we know, with manual deployments, manual error, more error prone, and you can't get to market as quick, right? So introducing a full pipeline utilizing the AWS services for faster, less error prone releases, all right? So a massive improvement, right? When we're comparing this version 1 to version 2, but it takes time, right? This entire process, once we're on cloud, took 18 months to get to this point, but now we're reaping the benefits. Okay, so I guess now, Jasper, coming back to you, so compared to your environment before, right, version 1 and previously DigitalOcean, after the modernization, what are you now seeing as the major benefits to 42?
Yeah, so right now, I would say that I mean, management-wise, we could clearly see who's making what changes because of the CI/CD processes that were introduced by Jam. So let me just run through that a little bit. So previously, we were using code repositories such as Git. But the thing is, because we are hosted on a single EC2 instance, so we basically need to upload code onto that instance in order for it to run. And sometimes developers make mistakes, and when they do, they may upload code that overwrites each other. So they don't know who's at fault, who's the one uploading the wrong code. So with the CI/CD processes in place, right now, pretty much everything is trackable via Git. So we're running off GitHub. And when we actually, commit our code to GitHub, the CI/CD processes will trigger, which will then build a brand new version of our code, and therefore ensuring that no one's overriding each other. Even if they do, it's heavily tracked by the commits on GitHub. So that's something that's changed. And the other point is that I think right now, as you mentioned, we are on ECS running via Fargate tasks. So instead of vertically scaling every time we need our demands grows, we can now horizontally scale, and we can set everything to auto scale, where our front end is actually running independently of the back end. So whichever needs not more power, it's able to auto scale on demand. And of course, having already on AWS Aurora is great because previously, I mean, even back to Vodian time, we don't get that. We don't get point in time restore down to the minute. So right now, after we've re-platformed to AWS on the lift and shift, we are now able to go back any point in time based on our preference and be able to do any kind of disaster recovery in case we need it. So those are the obvious differences. And the other thing is that because, like I mentioned before, last time we used to run almost all our software within a single EC2 instance. Right now, it's great to be able to split them all out because whenever there are issues or whenever there are scalability demands, we can scale the exact piece of software that we want instead of having to scale every single the whole server like we've done before just to cater to the specific software. So I think for that, Jam has really done a good job for us, in helping us navigate through that. And I wouldn't say the journey is easy. It took us about 6 months just to get through that, and it's a real learning curve. So Callum is right when he says that you should start to just crawl and learn to walk and run instead of rushing through everything. Yeah, that's so yeah.
Awesome, thanks for that.
Yeah.
All of those are major benefits, right, that we see day to day. The scale, I think it's so important for an organization like FortyTwo's e-commerce. You have certain sales. You want the trust, the belief, the confidence that your infrastructure can handle that, right? Rather than you sitting there, you watching the CPU, and then you have to scale it yourself, effectively just sitting back. I'm sure the first few sales, you was there just looking at it, making sure it works, but now I'm sure it's a much more of a low stress activity. All right, but yeah, perfect. Thank you for sharing those things, Jasper. Katie, coming to you. So you speak to, customers on a day-to-day basis, right? Like for customers now that are listening to this on the webinar, but listening to the recording, and they're thinking about migrating and potentially modernizing the future, even if they may already be on cloud, but they're not sure where to start. Kind of what's your advice for them?
Sure. I think there's multiple ways to start your cloud adoption journey, right? AWS, we have extensive resources in support on our platform. And of course, we do also have AWS communities that, everywhere, that's super helpful. Alternatively, of course, you can reach out to our friendly partners like Just After Midnight. who really has a great migration modernization methodology, right? So everything Calum explained just now pretty much relates back to something that AWS has as well. So if you search on AWS stage of adoption, it's very correlated back to the methodology of crawl, walk, and run, right? And I do agree. I think I do see it plenty of time, right? Customers get excited and then they straight away jump in and start the migration to cloud. I agree with Calum. Don't rush it, right? And really take the time to look internally and understand what are some of the business challenges that you're trying to solve, right? Start from there. Right, be it, let's say, for example, making your application much more scalable, much more secure, be it saving your IT costs, or even, creating better customer experience or understanding your customer better by creating a data platform, right? And once you have that, and that's clear, yeah, just pick up the phone, give us a call, and yeah, we'll be more than happy to, guide you along your cloud adoption journey.
Awesome, thanks, Katie. And Jasper, I'm sure the next stage, I'm sure you're going to want a bit of a break, right? But AI is next. That's what everyone's speaking about. So I'm hoping that's the next project that we're going to work on together anyway, and how we kind of support and grow with 42 together. Okay, so enough about the Q&A. I think we've probably got about 5 to 10 minutes now for the audience's Q&A. So Holly, do you want to kind of just bring up some questions so we can answer them and see how we go for the next 5 to 10 minutes?
Yeah, sure. We got a couple that were submitted directly to me. So I've got one for Jasper. You did touch on having some sort of learning curve in this experience. So this question might sort of appeal to that, is that what was the most significant challenge you encountered during your infrastructure migration, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah. So I think moving on to any platform, not only do you need to learn new things, you need to also, kind of ensure that your team is ready for it. So that's kind of my experience. So when we were being replatformed on AWS through the lift and shift, I think even then there was a lot to learn. Like we were learning new concepts, about how Aurora works, how EC2 works, for example. And after that, when we stepped into the modernization project, there were so much more to learn, because then as we are running our applications on ECS through Fargate tasks, this means that we'll need to dabble into things like Docker and also containerization technology. So there's so much to learn, but I think what's fortunate for us is that I think I'm not ashamed to say that we picked the right partner for this, because Gem has been extremely helpful in going through all the different technologies with us, and even when we don't have questions, even when we have like a lot of questions, they are very patient to answer them. And I think what's great about them is also that whatever issue that we are experiencing, they are not afraid to jump in and offer help to us. So I think that is something that is very valuable to us, and especially when we are led into a platform that we are not exactly very familiar with. Yeah.
That's great.
Thanks,
Thank you, Jasper. We've got also one for Katie here. Do you see Gen AI as being an essential tool in the future of infrastructure modernization?
Gen AI. Okay. Yeah, I mean, like, look, Gen AI is the buzz now, right? Everybody's talking about it, and I'm a believer. Definitely, I think it's a technology where it's going to transform the way that we do a lot of things in the future. And yeah, I think to a certain extent, it's going to help you sort of like start your modernization journey. But if you ask me, get the baseline correct first, right? And yeah, if your critical application now currently is already on the cloud, it's already modernized and it's optimized per se, right? Then yeah, I think it's going to release a lot of resources and time for you to really explore Gen AI and yeah, use it to create a better customer experience for your customers. Since we're at Gen AI, just a quick shout out. So yeah, Amazon, we do have our Amazon Q as well as our Amazon Bedrock AWS services that really gives you the enterprise grade security and privacy, right, while having access to the latest foundation models. So yeah.
And I'm sure if you contact Katie, he'll give you some credits as well on your Gen AI journey. Thanks, Katie.
That's awesome. And lastly, we've got one for Callum. Based on your experience, what advice would you give to an organization that's considering a similar migration journey?
I think so. We've been doing migrations now for many years. I've been doing migrations for myself when I was a techie, kind of over 10 years now. And you learn from these things, right? I've seen it before. I've done it before where I've rushed something and I fell foul. So the key thing is don't rush it, right? Have a plan, take your time. And I think on top of that, it goes back down to the principles, right? You've got to have real business reasons why you want to move to cloud, whether it's cost saving, scalability, performance. You need to have something, because then you've got to design your architecture based on those principles. So you can't just think, hey, I'm going to move to cloud because that's what my friend's doing, or that's what John down the street's doing. You need to have a key reason behind that. And then the final thing I think is just have a methodology, work with someone that's done it before, speak with people. AWS have a big community on migration and lessons learned. So even if you want to do that yourself, and most customers these days do look to migrate themselves if they have the right team, but utilize the cloud provider, utilize their capability and their lessons learned to support you on that journey. All right.
Thanks, Callum. We've had one submitted just late now, which I think we might have a little bit of time for. I think this one's directed for Jasper. So it says, even though there is a lot of work from version 1 to version 2, I suppose the main bottleneck from a customer and user perspective came from the in-premise to V1 architecture on AWS, and mainly for the database. How did you manage the downtime, if there was, for customers, knowing that Magento database can be huge?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. So when we did the lift and shift, I would say that downtime was inevitable because we are being re-platformed on another platform. So obviously we had to set a cutoff point where we don't allow customers to create accounts or place new orders in order to have the transition in terms of the data over to AWS. So and now and moving forward from version 1 to 2, because we actually are upgrading our Magento version, so there is also a data migration that's being involved. So I would say it's really not easy, and it can lead to quite a long stretch of downtime. But I think what's good is that GEM has really made it such that they kind of smooth out the process to us. They even help to identify if there are any key things that we need to take note of when we are shifting our database over, whether it's being re-platformed or whether it's going through the data migration process. So yeah, it's really not easy. It's there will be downtime, definitely.
Yeah.
And I hope
And I think just to
answered.
add on there as well, there are possibilities of doing zero downtime migrations these days, but it's very, very complex. It's so complex. It adds a lot of time to the actual project management timeline in ensuring that it is possible. So if the organization can handle a period of downtime, it makes the migration a lot easier. I remember, Jasper, now, I mean, I remember it was, well, about over 2 years ago, right, that migration happened. I remember Zach and Mia, they was working with you and the team through the night. Obviously, the beauty of an organization like 42, where it's mainly kind of Singapore focused, is obviously the busiest part is towards the middle, kind of lunch towards the end of the day, right? Early morning, there is that idea, obviously, that there's not many people accessing a furniture store. So we had a window within there. For other organizations, more global ones, that's more challenging, and that's where potentially the zero downtime option comes in.
Yeah, I think overall it's what's the cost to you, and will you be able to then sustain those costs, or would you then take those costs and try to find another more costly method to do a zero downtime migration? So it's either or, I think.
Yeah.
Great, thanks guys. I think that's all the questions that we've got time for, but we will follow up with any more questions from the attendees after the webinar. Okay, so you will.
Awesome, thank you. Holly, could you
receive
bring
that.
the final slide up for me a second, just to allow other people just to screenshot? And just before we close out, everyone, thank you so much for coming on. You see on this slide here, we've got our LinkedIn across Katie, Jasper, and myself. A bit about the company, so if you want to contact AWS, 42 for furniture, or myself in terms of migration, modernization, or support. And then finally, we've written a paper on this, specifically on application transformation. So very similar to what we spoke about today, but in a kind of a reading format. So please take your time, scan the QR codes, and hopefully we'll be in touch. But just once again, thank you again for coming on, spending your morning or your afternoon with us today. And a big thank you to both Jasper and Katie for taking the time and sharing their experience. And I'm sure it's very useful for the audience.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Cool.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. Have a good day.